which should be fine. I did allow a little bit of extra time. So I've done that introduction there. Just to note that these materials, I'm not able to share the actual PowerPoint presentations, but I do have some resources, Deb, which I'm happy to share with you that you can share with the participants today.
Sure.
But they're in the full training module. TBRI is actually a 4-day deep dive caregiver package, but I often only do the 1 day because it's we get lots out of it, and I only run the 4 days, only a couple of times a year. But the participants get a full handbook with all the notes and things that go along with the PowerPoint slides. So what we're going to be doing today is just give a little bit of an overview of what TBRI is. We're going to be laying the foundation for insight. So what is it that we want to, how do we sort of frame this up to enhance our understanding of behaviour? To interpret it first in the first instance, but then how do we actually respond? Because I'm guessing here that the people who have joined us today, it's the children's behaviour who they care for that gives them the most angst and worry and confusion. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of each of the 3 principles of TBRI. So TBRI is structured in 3 principles. Within each principle, there are 2 strategies, and each of those strategies is broken down into a number of actual practices. So I'll share with you some of those very simple and effective practices that you can take home and have a try with your kiddos. One of the things that you may hear me reference today is a term "children from hard places," and this is a term that comes from TBRI, which I think is a lovely way for us to think about the children that we care for, because life has been really hard for them. They have come from a very difficult place. I know in my days in education, and certainly as a professional, I've used, that trauma child, or which is very disrespectful to the experiences of our kiddos. So, children from hard places is a term that we use in TBRI, and for me, it just keeps in mind. Like I said, life is hard, has been hard for these kids, and it helps me keep that compassion and empathy going, when, especially some days when that might be a little bit low, and I need to give a little bit more. The TBRI is a holistic intervention, so it looks at the whole child. It's evidence-based. As I said, you'll probably recognise some other models. You'll recognise little bits of PACE from Dan Hughes. You'll recognise bits of Circle of Security. You'll recognise a little bit of therapeutic crisis intervention if you're familiar with that framework. It's a therapeutic parenting model. And that's what it was initially designed for. And it was actually born from 2 developmental psychologists, Dr. Karen Purvis and Dr. David Cross. Dr. Purvis unfortunately passed away a number of years ago. Dr. Cross just retired last year from the Institute. We'll see at the end, I've got a little video to share with you guys just to see how TBRI looks in action. And that's with Dr. Purvis, and she was the ultimate child whisperer. But essentially what Dr. Purvis did was gathered a number of children who were adopted from Eastern European countries. And the initial intent for her camp, she ran a day camp that lasted a couple of weeks. And her initial intention was to just give the adoptive parents a bit of a break. But after the first week, the adoptive parents came back and said, "What have you done? You know, we're really seeing quite a shift and a settlement of our children." So the university, TCU, or Texas Christian University, sort of started following her around and coding what she was doing. And that's really how TBRI was born, was just following Dr. Purvis around. It is developmentally respectful, so it really looks at meeting the needs of the child where they are developmentally. often what we find with our children from hard places is they may be chronologically one age, so say 10 or 12, but developmentally they're often a lot younger than their chronological age. But they might have and they often have the street smarts of a child a lot older. So you've got this really complex little person in front of you who's one age but developmentally behaves in a much younger age. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember as caregivers and professionals when we're looking after children from hard places is developmentally they often get stuck. So what we do in TBRI is we go back to where that child is developmentally, and a rather crude or rudimentary way of approaching this is what I do is I look at how old the child is when they melt down. So if I've got a 10-year-old in my care who, when they sort of melt down, and that might be frequently, then they look more like a 5-year-old in how they're reacting to a situation. I'll sort of aim my strategies and at that developmental age, not the chronological age of the child. In doing that, what we end up doing is bringing the child up to their chronological age. And it's also a lot more respectful to where the child's at. So we're really meeting our kiddos where they're at. TBRI is also very much trauma-informed and trauma-responsive. So, trauma-informed can often become a little bit of a buzzword, but we really do bear in mind what our children have experienced with a deep understanding of what the impacts are to that child, which helps us understand those behaviours. Because it's attachment focused and centered, we are essentially bringing our children back to those very earlier days where their attachment needs may not have been met. And I'll talk through that a little bit more about that as we go on. I love me a good mantra, and some days mantras are something that keep me going through the day. And this was something that drew me to TBRI as well, is that we have mantras. We have these short scripts that we can kind of draw on in the heat of the moment. This is a poster of one of my favorite mantras is stay calm, no matter what, and this is something that I try and keep in mind. I'm not going to be able to co-regulate a child in my care or that I'm working with if I'm not regulated and calm myself. The fundamental thing that we do, and this is often where I start with caregivers, is really focusing on seeing the need beneath the behaviour. So in TBRI, we're really focused on what's happening underneath that child's behaviour that's driving that behaviour. And if we meet the need, there's no need for that behaviour of the child. So really remembering that behaviour for children in particular, but for all of us, is usually an expression of an unmet need. So if we can be curious and look at what could possibly be driving that need, then and meet that. As I said, the child doesn't need to use their behaviour to express their needs. And that's what happens with a lot of our children from hard places, is they end up using their behaviour, not their words. So we're always helping the children to express use their voice and express their needs through words rather than their behaviour. And that final one there of, don't quit, because if it's not you, then who's going to pick up the pieces here? And this can be a nice reminder sometimes when we feel like, we've had enough and you do want to quit. You'll see in TBRI as we go through today, there's a lot of focus on self-compassion. We desperately need that as caregivers for children from hard places. It's a struggle. Some days it's a battlefield. And then some days we have these magical days where everything sort of flows. But when it doesn't flow, we've got to be kind to ourselves. It's really important. TBRI is... Oh, sorry, was there a question?
Oh. No, I haven't seen anything in the chat.
Nothing's popped up. Okay. TBRI is used in lots of settings. And as I mentioned, when I was over in the States, I travelled around and had a look at it in different settings. It's used in schools quite widely as a framework. It's used in a lot of residential homes. TBRI is used in a lot of orphanages. So as I said, in the initial beginnings of TBRI, the team actually spent a lot of time in African orphanages and Eastern European orphanages in particular, refining the principles and the strategies and working with staff and professionals in those countries. So it is widely used. There's lots of professionals in those particular countries that use TBRI. It's also used in detention centres in the States, and there's a project at the moment, I know, in one particular state in America where they're rolling out TBRI in adult prisons. So TBRI is not just for children. It can be used for for adults as well. Because it's designed to meet the needs of children of all ages, backgrounds, and circumstances, it does really honour the developmental trajectory of where children are. So it's equally applicable to teenagers, and I can attest. I've got a couple of teenagers in my home. It definitely works. You may adjust some of your language, but the underlying strategies and principles are the same. TBRI absolutely requires us to practice humility and curiosity, and as I mentioned before, lots of compassion, not just for ourselves, but for our kiddos and also others around us as well. It's not a checklist, TBRI. It's not a, if you complete sections 1 to 5, then, that's it. It's all is good. It's messy. It's a journey. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, but we're forever practicing and coming back and trying again. In the full TBRI training package, we follow through the journey of organisation, disorganisation and reorganisation. So we take a deep dive into what is the organisation for a child's brain and body in optimal environments, and then what happens when that isn't met. So that's the disorganisation, and that's what happens for a lot of our children, or all of our children from hard places, is they miss out on a lot of those optimal times in their early development. Then we sort of focus on that reorganisation. So what do we need to do as caregivers to kind of reorganise and support that child's body and brain to heal and get them back on track? I'm just going to very quickly touch on trauma, but we, in TBRI, we don't really focus too much on the definition of trauma, or we've more focus on the impacts of trauma. And this is about us as caregivers and professionals understanding that need beneath the behavior. So trauma, it's defined in many different ways, but there's depends who you're listening to. Some people think it's a collection of events or a single event, but it's very much a personal experience for people, and there's a range of factors that may influence how somebody responds to a traumatic event. So we more focus on the impacts of that adversity for children. We focus a lot on the physiological and understanding that the physiological responses to trauma. We don't need any labels for TBRI to be effective or to use TBRI. As I said, it's applicable to all humans, and certainly in my professional work, I come across so many caregivers who are traumatized from their caregiving experience, because it can be really, really tricky, and then you've got the systemic issues that kind of compound that as well. So I work with a lot of carers who are deeply traumatized themselves. So I TBRI my carers when I'm working with families. I TBRI the professionals, the government professionals, our child protection people. So whilst TBRI was originally developed for children who had experienced relational trauma, it is used, and much more now, it's used more broadly. So don't think of it as just something to use for children. Use it on the adults around you, because really when we're talking about being trauma informed and trauma responsive, it starts with us. And once we sort of go through that journey, we can't unsee a lot of the stuff that we begin to learn and understand. I will just touch very quickly on the risk factors, and for caregivers online here, you may sort of know some history of the children that you have in your care. You may not, but here's some of the risk factors. Of course, it's not all, but we know through research that when children are exposed in utero to toxic stress of their mum, that starts to impact the developing brain, the nervous system, particularly particularly at the brainstem, which is the first to develop in utero. So the brainstem is responsible for our state regulation, so sleep and breathing and all those really basic, largely unconscious sort of functions. So if you've got a child who did experience high levels of stress while in utero, we know without a doubt that there's going to be some disruption there, in that brainstem area. Through some other research, and quite interesting research actually, is something that I didn't know, was in children who experienced early hospitalization and in particular invasive medical procedures. So I'm not talking about just your general immunization needles or anything like that. These might be medical procedures that were that are required for to save a child's life. Often our children from hard places, they've not only had a difficult prenatal experience, but often they're born premature. They may have spent time in the neonatal intensive care unit, which that in itself disrupts attachment and the sensory system, so the developing sensory system. But if that child also requires some invasive medical procedures, a really interesting piece of research looked at children pre-verbal, so under the age of 3, and through functional MRIs, they found that the pathways for those children going through those invasive medical procedures was very much the same as physical abuse. So if you think about it from a young child's experience of having these procedures, not understanding that they're required to save that child's life or they're absolutely necessary. All they know is that this hurts and no one's stopping it. And in fact, my caregiver might be standing there holding my hand and sort of smiling at me. So that in itself, whilst it's unavoidable, that in itself can really raise the, increase the risk factors for children from hard places. Other ones that are more commonly known are abuse and neglect. I know that, historically neglect was thought to be a lesser of the, having an impact on children. But again, our research tells us that it has the most pervasive long-term impact for children. So neglect is where something isn't given to a child as opposed to something happening to a child. So neglect is a really big one as well. Other things such as witnessing domestic violence, carer or parental substance misuse or mental health. Multiple caregiver changes we know is another risk factor for children, and our children from hard places in the care and adoptive system go through multiple caregiver changes often, not always, but often there's lots of disruption in caregivers. Other things like poverty, poor housing quality, exposure to community violence. So these are the wider risk factors or adverse adverse childhood experiences, they're called. Fundamental lack of resources, which sort of feeds into that neglect as well. We've also got, in terms of other sort of broader adverse childhood experiences, things like discrimination, racism, and we also have traumatic experiences as well. So this could be just a one-off event. So, having an unexpected death of a loved one, or being involved in a major car accident or a house fire or things like that. So these are just risk factors that when we understand what our children have gone through, if we're trying to really sort of understand our little people, you may, as I said, you may be aware of what your children that you care have gone through, but you may not as well. Sometimes you don't get all of that information. I work with a lot of professionals to make sure that they gather as much of that information as possible so that we can build a profile, an accurate profile of just how much adversity our children have really experienced, because we may not capture it all. When we're talking about the 5 B's of trauma, this would have to be one of the more important things, I think, slides. And Deb, this is one of the resources that I'll send through to you. If you have a look at this, and Dr. Purvis kind of categorized the impacts of trauma under the 5 B's to help us sort of understand that whilst the behavior is and you'll see on that slide there that the behavior is the only externalizing B there. All the other Bs are sort of internal, so they're invisible. We can't see them. But behavior we can absolutely see. And it's often the behavior that brings caregivers to seeking additional support, because they're at their wits' end about the behavior and they don't know what to do. So I want you to just pause, and we'll pop the behavior over to the side, because when we start addressing those invisible Bs, and this is really what leads us to those underlying needs that often sit beneath for the child, that comes out through behavior. So I'm just very quickly going to run through those other invisible Bs, and then we'll come back to the behavior. So we know a lot about the brain these days. There's been so much research over the last sort of 20 years around the brain, but there's still a lot we don't know. But at its very, very simplest, we know that when children have been exposed to compounding stressful experiences, particularly in those earlier childhood, the earlier parts of their childhood, when their brain is really going through that big development, the brain then becomes organized just purely around survival. So we see more of that downstairs sort of operating in the brain, so those lower functions of the brain, as opposed to those upstairs parts of the brain where we are able to sort of be calm and rational and think, and we can understand cause and effect, and we can focus. And they're the days that are golden for us as carers, is when our children are in their upstairs brain. But often we know that our children from hard places operate very much down in that survival brain. So understanding even the Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. So flipping the lid. I don't know if everyone's familiar with the hand model of the brain. But if you want to just sort of put your hand up together, and we'll make a little fist, and we'll run through that. It's very helpful to teach adults. It's something I taught my husband a number of years ago, but also our children. If we teach our children about the hand model of the brain and what's happening in their brain, that can empower them as well. So if we hold our hand up, and this is the representation of a little brain, and this here is the brain stem. So that's that lowest, most primitive form of our brain. And if we open our fingers in the middle, the thumb here is our limbic system. So this is where we've got our amygdala. That's our alarm system in our brain. And so from the limbic system down is our downstairs brain. They all serve a purpose. But if we want a child that's calm and regulated, we actually want, and so we want this part of the brain here. So this is our thinking brain. So this is our prefrontal cortex here. Now, this for all of us under stress or threat, and you may recognize some of this in yourself, but when you're overwhelmed or under stress or tired, we can flip our lid, so our tolerance becomes lower. Things can sort of trigger us a lot more, and we flip our lid. So when we flip our lid, all of that beautiful sort of top part of our thinking brain goes offline, and we can't access that. So we're really sort of functioning at that lower level. So it's in that survival state. So just even knowing that information, as I said, is really empowering for us, but also for our kiddos. And I'll share with you a quick story. When I was in education, I had 4 schools that I was working with, and we made them trauma informed and even better trauma responsive schools. So everyone from the principal down to the groundsman and the admin ladies, they were all received the same information. And the one thing I love about teachers is you give them information and they take it away and they do beautifully creative things. And I was doing a walkthrough one day with this teacher, with the principal, and this little preppy who was 5, and I knew him quite well because I was often called in to consult on what to do with his behaviour. He was often trashing classrooms and evacuating classrooms. Well, this little guy whizzes out of the classroom, and he sees the principal, and he stops and he says to her, "My amygdala's just going crazy. I need to go for a run." And off he runs. And I said to her, that's amazing. If every child in your school understands when their amygdala is going crazy and what their amygdala needs in those situations to be able to calm back down, and we can give it to them, we're going to see much better behaviors. We're going to see lower rates of aggression. And that's exactly what happened in that school, is that they did so well that they used to have bus loads of teachers from interstate that would come and have a look at what she was doing. She did amazing work. So that's the brain. So we have to understand that the brain often is hijacked and is operating in that survival state. When we're looking at the biology, this is what we're looking at, the impact of that chronic activation of the HPA axis. So that's the part of our body and our stress response system, which is responsible for our immune system, our digestion, our sleep, our memory. And for those caregivers online, you may have children who have lots of digestion or tummy issues or skin disorders. We see lots of eczema and things like that. Memory is often really poor for our children from hard places, and this is as a result of just being chronically in a high state of stress. And this is really demonstrated through the adverse childhood experiences study. So that's there's a lot of really amazing information, not only in how this impacts the biology in childhood, but in later life as well. So we know that the higher the adversity, through the ACE study, we know that the higher the adversity, the more likely you will have a touch point in the mental health system and the justice system, and you're more likely to be homeless and experience addiction and things like that. So these are the biological changes. This also takes into account the development of the nervous system as well. So we know that the nervous system, while it's being developed in that high state of stress, that our children don't operate in that higher sort of safe feeling part of their nervous system. They sort of operate in that more activated or shut down response in their nervous system. So we see, behaviors that will represent that. When we look at the body, and this comes from research that came just after the adverse childhood experiences study in 1998, this really focuses on what is happening in the sensory world. So how is this child experiencing the world in their body due to the disruption in their sensory system? So this research found a number of really interesting impacts in terms of the higher your adversity in childhood, the more likely you're going to have a number of different sensory sensitivities. Some may reach the threshold of requiring a diagnosis and structured sort of supports, but for a lot of children, they may sit underneath that threshold. As a carer, I just make the assumption that children who come into my home have some kind of sensory sensitivities in multiple areas. So I make sure I pay attention to what that child is moving towards or moving away from. And I'll give you some examples from that study. Is they found that 63% of children who'd had high adversity experienced difficulties in auditory processing. Now, for those who haven't experienced or haven't had a child, or maybe you have, but you may not know this, sensory processing, what that looks like behaviorally, is a child that's not listening. But what's happening for that child is that they need a little bit of extra time to sort of process that information. So it comes, I hear the information, I process it, and then I do the thing. But if I don't know that as a carer, that's going to be really frustrating for me. So for example, if I'm asking the child in my care to not kick the football in the house, especially near the television, and they keep on kicking it or bouncing the ball or doing that behavior for another 3 or 4 bounce, or even 5 or 6 bounces. If I don't know that there's a good chance that this child may have a difficulty in that auditory processing, what I'm going to do is become really frustrated when that child disobeys my instruction and takes the ball outside. But if I'm more attuned to this and I know that I need to give this child more time to process the information, when they stop bouncing the ball and take the ball outside, I can praise them for that good behavior. But if I don't know that, I'm going to flip out and probably yell and scream and lose my cool. Likewise, that study found 66% of children in their study they found were had sensory seeking challenges. Now, sensory seeking looks very much like ADHD, and often for these children, they need to orientate their body in time and space. So again, as a caregiver, if I have a child who's continually rubbing their dirty little fingers along my white walls as they walk up the hallway, and I'm asking them repeatedly not to do that, and they continue to do that, if I don't know this piece of information, what am I going to do? I'm going to get really cross and probably lose it with the child. So if I see that happening repeatedly, I'm going to be a little bit more curious, and I'm going to meet that sensory need for that child. I'm going to give them a little bit of sensory input so they don't need to be touching everything. I'm going to meet that underlying need for that child. Now, again, we're going to skip the behavior and we're going to go to the beliefs. And for me, this is one of the most saddening things. And this is, as a carer and as a professional, I never want to contribute to this belief system. And have a think about how your child in your care might think about themselves as a child, whether they see themselves as a good child or a child that's a bad child, about a child that that can't go to school full time, or everyone's always angry at them. I know professionally, when I talk to children about what they think of themselves, that's most of the time, pretty much. I rarely meet a child who's got a good sense of self and believes themselves to be a good child. They often tell me about, well, Kerri, I'm always in trouble. I can only go to school 1 hour a day, and I don't have any friends. So their whole notion about who they are as a child is really low. In my work with parents who've also been children from hard places, I can tell you that belief system doesn't change. So a lot of the parents that I work with believe themselves to be bad kids, and they're still not, they're not good parents, they're not good adults. So if we do address those invisible Bs, then the language of our children from hard places, which is of unmet needs, it's not necessary. So the behavior naturally sort of extinguishes. And that's what we're aimed to do a lot in TBRI is yes, we absolutely address the behavior, all behavior, but we also very much focus on those invisible Bs and look to what is the need, the underlying need there for the child. I'm going to share with you another really important bit of information in TBRI, and this is a mental model, or how we look at behaviors. So what are the things that what is the lens in which we look at behaviors, and we've got one that might be willful disobedience. Now, spoiler alert, I'm a kid of the 70s, so my parents were very much authoritarian. So for me, under threat or when I'm tired or overwhelmed, I very much, no matter how much training and practice I've done, my template is where I get my parenting template is from my parents. So I'm aware of that. And when I do that, I will slip into this lens of willful disobedience. So let's have a look at what that one is. Oops. Willful disobedience is, so if you have a look at this little diagram here, we've got the adults over on the left hand side, and then we've got the child on the right hand side there. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. It's a willful disobedience here. In the willful disobedience, and I used to come across this a lot with when I was working in education, that the notion is that they could if they wanted to. And when we look at behaviour through this lens, we often get into a power struggle. Hands up who feels like they're in a continual power struggle with their kiddo. Yep. And no one wins. And often for our children from hard places, it's almost like they get off on the power struggle. It's almost like they move towards the power struggle. And I know when I work with my caregivers, they're tired, they're depleted. So let's have a look at when we look at our behavior through that lens of willful disobedience, we see a misbehavior and we come in and we enforce more rules. And so we might sort of, rein them in a little bit. And we're sort of really aiming for compliance here. And what our kiddo does from hard places in response to more rules is that they'll increase their resistance. And what we might do is increase our more rules and tighten things up a little bit, and that's where we get into that power struggle. What we then end up seeing is these oppositional behaviors that kind of filter out into maybe outside of the home, into school, into the playground, into the sports fields. So it kind of seeps out everywhere. It might actually be the reverse, where the school might be looking at or addressing the child's behavior through this lens, and it starts filtering into the home. We start seeing a lot more social problems, and our relationship with our child really sort of just starts, goes down the toilet. And we just get, the more frustrated we become, the more we increase our reinforce our rules and sort of hang on for dear life. And a lot of that for us as adults is that fear. Fear that if we, let that, maybe if we let the child learn from these mistakes, or if we're not doing that, we're not keeping them safe, and the worst thing may happen for them. But what we want to try and do is sit more within a lens of survival behavior. And when we look at our children's behavior through this lens, we actually understand that where the behavior is coming from. So again, we're coming back to that. I know what the need is. I may not know exactly what the need is, but I know that there's an underlying need here. And that if this child could, they absolutely would, but they're in that spontaneous fight, flight, or freeze. Often for our children from hard places, it's that fight or flight, but we sometimes see the freeze. So when we look at behavior through this lens, and this is our lens through TBRI, is that we have this concept of giving voice, and I'll talk about that a little bit further on. And this comes back to those earlier attachment needs that haven't been met. So we help our children use their voice to get their needs met. We have a lot more compassion and understanding because we understand the why. And just by doing that alone, that reduces our frustration. So we're able to sort of move towards the child's behaviors in a much more calm way, and we can teach the child. So we start building a lot more awareness for the child. So remembering, if we can teach our children what's happening in their brain, in their body, and we give them strategies to replace or to help calm them down. A lot of the behaviors for our children is underlying fear or terror. And so we want to sort of reduce that fear for our children. When we help our children use their words, not their behavior, we end up in an upward spiral in the relationship, and we increase what's called felt safety. So felt safety is very different to the actual notion of being safe. I know as a carer, I can't guarantee a child that you're going to be safe with me, because the ultimate, thing that's happened to them is the very people who are supposed to keep them safe haven't been able to, and they've endured, so many situations where they haven't been safe or haven't felt safe. So felt safety is an experience, and think about if you've ever been in a situation where your gut just sort of tells you, this doesn't feel right. So it sort of really is an unsettling sort of feeling in your body. In TBRI, all that we do is about increasing that sense of felt safety, that body safety, and we do a lot of that through our empowering principles. So if I know that if I'm listening to myself and I'm hearing words like couldn't, shouldn't, refusing, they're manipulative, they're aggressive, all of these sort of negative labels, that's a cue to myself that I may have slipped into this lens of looking at the behavior. I sort of pause and take a breath and go, okay, let's just take a step back. Let me bring some compassion to this situation, and let me think about what is the need, what is happening for this child. if you don't know, take a couple of guesses. And the top two, in my experience, is attachment. It's a connection need for the child. So if I can give my child a connection, I'm absolutely going to be addressing the behavior. But if I can give them a connection and meet that connection need in the first instance, and then we can curiously look about what else do you need? Is there some physiological needs that we need to be meeting? So little challenge there is have a think about, how do you view behavior? And it's okay, you know, as I said, my natural state, that's what I grew up with, that's what I'm used to. And I know for myself that under stress, when I'm tired, when I'm overwhelmed, it's easy for me to come back there. Pause, give yourself some compassion, take a few deep breaths, and let me have a look at this behavior through a different lens. If this child could, they absolutely would. And it's my job as the adult caregiver to help them with that. I'll share a quick story with you. I did some training with some grandparent carers last year, and I could tell they'd been voluntold to come and see me for this training. And this granddad comes in and he sits down and he says, before his bum's hit the seat, and he says, "I just don't know why I can't hit my grandson." And I said, "I know. Come have a seat and let's see if we can work it out." Anyway, at the end of the training, he came up to me and he said, "Kerri, I've realised I'm the problem." I said, "I know." And I ended up doing some work with him and his beautiful wife, and they had such a lovely little grandson. He was 8, but hard work, you know, really hard work. And when we sort of talked it through, and I said to him, what was it that was a light bulb moment for you? And he said, "Kerri, when you talked about the willful disobedience, that's what really resonated with me," you know. And he was a man who'd raised his children in the 60s and 70s. So, you know, this notion of looking at behavior differently was really unfamiliar for him. He had a lot of amazing knowledge and skills, but how he responded when the rubber hit the road with his grandson often resulted in him smacking him, which we know for our children from hard places absolutely doesn't work. So what do we do with all of that? These are the things, the underlying principles of what we're really trying to address through TBRI. We're always focused on building that attachment, that trust, that self-worth, that self-efficacy. Use your voice rather than your behavior. We focus a lot on building that sensory competency by being curious and paying attention to what are some of the maybe the underlying sensory needs that my kiddo needs to have met. We do a lot of building intentionally of social emotional competency. So through play and games, we purposely dysregulate children to only teach them how to regulate. So we build lots of muscle memory and practice these skills through fun and at low arousal levels, so that when we get those big behaviors, children can access that information a lot quicker. Everything that we do in TBRI, we're actually changing the brain chemistry, and we're bringing that child back onto the developmental path that they've fallen off. So we're, as I said at the beginning, we're meeting the child developmentally where they're at, and then bringing them up to where they need to be over time. So the 3 TBRI principles are connection. So we've got connecting principles, and they're broken down into mindful strategies, mindful awareness, and specific engagement strategies. So these connecting principles are all about meeting the attachment needs of the child. So that's heavily focused on connecting and helping that child feel safe within the relationship. It can be really hard some days, and hence the engagement strategies. They're really helpful to bring in when we might feel like we've got nothing left in the tank. Our empowering principles are look at the physical and the environmental things that we can do to create that felt safety for the child. And then our correcting principles are broken into the proactive. So we're proactively teaching how to respond, how to calm, how to regulate, and we're practicing those social skills that's required. And then we've also got our responsive strategies. So these are what we pull out in the moments where where we might have an escalation, or even maybe just a bit of back chat or whatever. Like I said, in TBRI, we absolutely address every single behaviour. It's how we address it that looks very different. TBRI is very high nurture and also very high structure, which in parenting terms is your authoritative parenting style. But we may adjust according to the situation, but we're always very high on both ends. So some situations may need a little bit of more structure, but we're still always really high in our nurture approach as well. So we practice a lot of that for ourselves as caregivers. So just a little representative of what the TBRI principles look like, and you'll see this is deliberate, that it's a pyramid, and you'll see that the connection is very much the foundation. So if we're heavily connected to our child, and we're using a lot of those empowering principles and strategies, we often find that we don't need to use many of the correcting strategies at all. So you'll see that at the top of the pyramid there, we actually don't need to use a lot, especially the responsive strategies. Often when I work with carers, or when carers come to my training, this is what's happening for them. They may be doing some connecting, but they're not enough, and they feel like they're just forever correcting. Give me a show of hands. Who's feeling like they're just always on their kids' case and they're always correcting their kiddos? Yeah, it's not a good place to be. It makes us feel bad as caregivers, right? And it takes away from those moments of connection. And you'll see there in that diagram that because the connection is we're not spending enough time, our relationship is shaky. A little blow and our relationship can sort of fall over. One of the first things that I say to carers when I work with them is take 5 minutes. We talk through who's the kiddo that's the most difficult for you to parent, and if there's a few, we triage them. But their home play, I call it, is to spend 5 minutes every single day of child-led play with their child. So if your kiddo wants to play handball, you better start getting good at handball. So asking your child every day and setting a timer and just doing 5 minutes of intentional and deliberate connection and play activity will very quickly start putting you on a base where your connection is stronger, and then we can start building on it from there. I've become very good at handball. I also become very good at Fortnite on the Xbox. That was one of my kiddos' requests. Not a fan of it, but I sit in it for 5 minutes, and he really loves it that I do that, and I'm taking an interest in something that he's passionate about. So just that sense, and I know that he loves it when I sit down and I don't grumble and complain. I get in there and we actually have fun. It's not my preferred activity, but it is his. All right, let's have a quick look at the connecting principles. As I said, it's broken down into mindful awareness is the first one. And then we've also got our connection strategies. So our mindful awareness, now in all of TBRI, everything is so beautifully simple, except this one here. So the mindful awareness. Now I'm not talking about sitting by a bubbling brook and doing yoga and stacking rocks. What I'm actually talking about is us focusing on ourselves. And in this, we're looking at understanding our own thoughts and emotions, understanding that we bring the weather, that it is us as the adults who set the tone and the outcome often for our interactions with our children. So in TBRI, we do a deeper delve into where do my thoughts, emotions, and behaviors come from. So we look at things like our own history, our own attachment style. We look at things like our own parenting style. We look at things like our values. What are the things that might trigger us? What are our buttons? How do we react in those situations? Knowing all of these things about ourselves, we can then become more deliberate and powerful in how we respond, in how we respond rather than react to certain situations. Let me give you a couple of examples here. So I said to you that my kid of the 70s, heavily influenced by authoritative parents. And who's had that thought where they've gone, oh my God, I sound like my mother or my father? Who's ever had that thought? and not in a good way either. And they're the times where I've got to sort of really take stock and pause and come back to what am I doing here? What's happening here? So just like we want to understand the needs of our children and the why of our children, we've also got to understand ourselves. So I'll give you another example. Who values honesty and respect? Who finds them, really important to them in terms of values? In my travels, they are would have to be in the top two, the top four when I talk about values of my carers. And I always say to them, how's caring working out for you then? Because absolutely we get faced with lying all the time, don't we? And we get a whole lot of disrespect. So if I know that these are important for me, and that I'm going to be triggered when I'm faced in a situation where a child lies to me, it's actually up to me to manage that as the adult, not up to the child. And I'm gonna just share some a strategy on how I manage because they're important values for me as well. So how I manage lying in my household, and this is a common behavior that comes up for in my work. First of all, I try as hard as I can not to put children in a situation where they have to lie to me. So I'll give you an example. If I know that someone has taken some lollies or taken something that they shouldn't have without asking, or I know that they've on their way home from school have sort of bypassed to somewhere that they know that they shouldn't have. When they get home, I'm not going to ask them and put them in this situation where they're going to have to lie to me. I'm just going to reframe it and say, next time you want a cookie or a chocolate, you can just ask me, darling. Right? It's a very different situation to knowing when they've got chocolate all over their face. Did you take the chocolate? And I know that they're going to lie to me because their fear sits underneath that. Their shield of shame is exceptionally high. And I want to try and work with them to reduce that. So I don't put them in situations where they need to lie to me. But secondly, I teach them through lots of conversations and the underlying intent of honesty, and that honesty equals trust. And so we talk more about trust and the importance of trust. And when I trust my kiddos, their world is big. I can trust them to go to a friend's house. I can trust them to have a little bit of freedom. And if the trust is broken, like a plate that's broken, we can glue it together, but it might be a little bit weak. And so we've got to work on rebuilding that trust together. So it's never just the child's focus. It's, we're in this together. We're going to do this together. So I also focus on that. I also talk to them about a agreement that it's much better, and my preference, that they come clean with me. So rather than getting a call from the school if there's been an issue at school or somewhere else. So I really encourage children to be open and honest, and in return I give them a commitment and agreement that I will listen and not react. Do I get that right all the time? No, I don't. There are situations where I do react, but that is also a wonderful opportunity for me to model rupture and repair. And we're going to talk about that as well, because that's where the gold is in our parenting journey, is how do we repair when something goes wrong? I'm not perfect. None of us are perfect. We're not robots. We're going to make mistakes. We need to show our children how to make mistakes and how to fix those mistakes afterwards. And one thing I do know is our children from hard places often don't know how to fix a mistake. They cut and run from their mistakes. There's so much shame attached. So I try and set up an environment and a situation where children don't feel the need to lie. And I take responsibility. If they do lie to me, my first question is, what have I done to create this situation where they feel they need to lie? Again, this is this mindful awareness. The other part of mindful awareness is being conscious of the child's emotional state and needs. And this is really the heart of being attuned to children. And we do that really well when our kiddos are babies. We can look at them or hear their cry, and we're beautifully attuned, and we know exactly what it is that they need. And if we don't, we do everything in our power to sort of meet their needs. as our kids get older, we sort of lose that ability to attune. So this is us being conscious. I can tell when my kiddos come through the door, it's not a great day for them, or when they get out of bed. And so I will be mindful in how I approach situations. Things still need to be done, but it's how I will approach them. And we use many of the TBRI strategies on how we may lower the bar or drop the rope on a difficult day, to make sure that we get to where we need to go. If that makes sense. How's the pace going for everybody?
Good.
Good? Okay, great. The other part of mindful awareness is around us, again, recognizing the context of where the environment of situations may happen. So again, I'm going to be attuned, knowing that there are going to be certain situations for this particular kiddo. Say, for example, taking them to Dream World is, I know, because this kiddo is quite sensory, and they get overwhelmed in big situations. So I'm going to have but they want to go, right? So I'm going to have a whole plan, knowing the context of what that child needs in that particular situation. So that's an example of being mindfully aware of the situation as well. So all combined, these things will greatly help us in how we respond rather than react to our children's behaviours, because it can absolutely influence the quality of our relationship with our child. So when we are being attuned, I always encourage our carers and parents to really adopt that detectives, perspective. And again, this is about being curious. What is the need? What is this child trying to say to me? What are they trying to express through this particular behavior? Sometimes, like I said, we don't know for sure, but we can take a few guesses and see if that works. Process of elimination, similar to how we would when we've got when we have a baby who doesn't cry. We do everything in our power to settle that cry. We change them, we feed them, we take them outside, we chuck them in the car and drive them around for 6 hours. We do everything we can to meet their needs. And in TBRI, we sort of take that same notion, and we try through process of elimination, what is it that you need so that I can meet that need. And this really comes back to that attachment cycle. Speaking of, I'm going to quickly run through with you. This is a really beautiful way to understand the attachment cycle. I've done a lot of additional study in attachment, and this is probably my favorite way to explain the attachment cycle. So think about your kiddo, or one of your kiddos, or a small baby, 6 months old, 3 months old. They're tired, or they don't have a lot of needs, especially not certainly as much as when they're older, but they cry, and through their cry they're expressing that need. So if you have a look at the top there, they're expressing their need, and they're in distress when they cry. So we see that through physiologically, we see their little face go red, we see them pump their arms, they're very loud, they might hold their breath, but they're in distress. And what happens in the body, if we have a look at the inner circle of this diagram here, what's happening here in the body is the sympathetic nervous system, which is an activated state that sort of gets turned on. So think about it like the accelerator in a car. And so that's sort of on. And then in the brain, in the outside part of the circle, we have these excitatory neurotransmitters. They're not exciting, they just elevate the chemicals in the brain. So baby cries, they've got a need, they've expressed that need through their cry. And as a caregiver, I hear the baby from the other room, and I match the energy, and I come running in and I pick the baby up and I meet the baby's needs. I give them some comfort. As I said, I might, I know that cry, that's your hungry cry. So I feed the baby and I bring comfort. In doing that, I'm activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the brake part of the body. So it calms the body down, the nervous system down. In the brain, we've got these inhibitory neurotransmitters. So these calm the brain. So this is a yin and a yang pattern that happens hundreds and thousands of times in the baby's first year of life. And this sets the attachment pattern for the baby. And it becomes the foundation for the infant of trust. So that baby learns pretty quickly that when I cry, someone's going to come. It learns very quickly and becomes the foundation for self-worth. I'm precious enough that someone's going to come and meet my needs. That voice, when I cry and someone comes, that's validated, when their caregiver comes and meets their needs. The middle part here of the cycle of the diagram, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, every time the need is expressed and the comfort is given, that yin and that yang, that becomes the foundation for self-regulation, right? So that builds that self-regulation. In infancy, babies are first of all externally regulated. So caregivers externally regulate the baby, right? Baby cries, they're tired, they're hungry, they're cold. We warm them, we feed them, we settle them, right? So we externally regulate them. After external regulation, we have co-regulation, and that's where we co-regulate with the child as they developmentally move into their twos and threes and beyond. Now, just a note on co-regulation, that never ends. There are days when I need co-regulation. If I've had a bad day, I ring my husband or my bestie. If I've had a good day, I'll reach out for somebody. So co-regulation is, we all need co-regulation at some point in time. A lot of our children from hard places miss that developmental step. In fact, sometimes they even miss that external regulated step as well. And then we've got, after co-regulation, we've got self-regulation. That's the ultimate, right? But I know some days I can't self-regulate. Again, it's not a developmental time period, so we don't just stop. Let's have a look at when those needs aren't met for whatever reasons. There's multiple reasons why this might happen. It could be because there's the caregiver is not around, or they may have some of their own issues that they haven't been able to meet the needs of the child. So if you have a look at that, what happens over here on the left side of the diagram is that kind of gets wiped out. So the need is expressed. And what happens is that the distress of the child just loops around. So baby just sort of, remains distressed. The sympathetic nervous system, so we get that sympathetic activation, sort of stays on point. And so if you think about it like a brick on the accelerator of a car, is stuck. And in the brain, we have these excitatory neurotransmitters. So that the chemical elevation in the brain, which is the foundation for mental health, is elevated, chronically elevated. For some babies, they may just switch off and just stop crying altogether. Who's ever had a baby where the baby just doesn't cry at all? Which is always a red flag for me, because babies are, they're designed to cry. That's how they get their needs met, is that they express their needs. So when we have a baby that never cries, that usually says to me that they're used to crying and expressing their needs as maybe being scary for them, or they've just given up. The brain sort of just shuts down and they dissociate. When we see this in children whose needs haven't been met consistently, and maybe they've been met, sometimes, but mostly not, from around 2 to 3 years of age, we see it very much in their behaviours. So you can walk into, anyone who works in early childhood, you can walk into a childcare centre and you can spot the children from hard places because they move differently in their body. From 4 to 6, we start seeing the symptomatology and the diagnosis of ADD, ADHD. And what happens around that age, 4 to 6 years of age? What's going on for kids? They're going to school. Often schools, I don't know what it's like in Victoria, but schools often say to our children from hard places they need to be medicated or they can't come to school. So we start seeing diagnoses of the Ds start emerging. We know that there is an overdiagnosis of a number of conditions in children from hard places, because the symptomatology of what's happening in the brain and the body looks the same. From 8 to 10, we start seeing depression and anxiety, which looks very different in children to adults. So in children, this manifests in agitation, violence, aggression, as opposed to the SADs and the lower sort of arousal states. Remembering this is an American model, we don't do this in Australia, but in America, they diagnose children with major psychiatric illnesses. But who's ever had a thought or heard somebody say this child, it's like they've got bipolar or schizophrenia? And that's that real dysregulation of both the body and the brain. You know, it's sort of, there's no way that it's been able to sort of regulate itself from those early patterns. So that's why we often see those behaviors that look like, you know, they're very confusing and very perplexing for us as caregivers to try and understand. Any questions about that attachment cycle? Let's see if there's a question. No. Okay. What we do in TBRI, though, is that we bring the child back onto this therapeutic attachment cycle without picking up my 11-year-old child and holding them like a, you know, newborn infant. But we very much repeat and bring them back to this cycle where their needs may have not been met. Remembering that their needs, our children from hard places often express their needs through behaviour. So coming back to what we want to do is help them use their words, not their behavior. Every time we meet that need, we provide comfort. We're activating that parasympathetic nervous system, that calming part of their body. We're bringing in the reduction of those inhibitory neurotransmitters in the brain and bringing on that cortisol break, if you will. Oops. All right. Very quickly, we talk a lot in the full care package around attachment, in the understanding the different attachment styles, how they present. Essentially, though, we've got secure attachment. So these are children whose most of the time their caregivers have met their needs. These are the children who grow up understanding, you know, how they have a good sense of self. They can negotiate relationships. They do well at school. They have much better outcomes as adults. The second type, then we've got insecure attachment styles. So this is where caregiving has not been consistent in some form. We're not going to go into it today, but we go into that a lot deeper to understand what these look like, these insecure attachment patterns look like. This one here is the one that we least want. This is where this child where caregiving has been quite frightening for that child. And there's no organized strategy. So we see little bits of security, we see little bits of avoidant, little bits of anxious, and their behavior looks very confusing. We might see diagnoses such as reactive attachment disorder and things like that sitting under the disorganized. We see a lot more of this style in our children from hard places in the care system, for sure. We see less of the secure attachment styles in children from hard places because of that disruption of their attachment and what's happened for them. So in infancy, the attachment behaviours are it's a survival behaviour. So infants very, very young, from about 2 weeks, we start seeing you know, that babies will learn how to survive through the way that they're responded to by their caregiver. What happens, though, in adulthood, particularly if we've got these more insecure attachment styles, is this becomes our relational strategy. So if we've had our own, as caregivers, if we've had our own disrupted attachments in early childhood that we haven't worked on or we're not aware of, these play out in our relationships and in our work relationships, our intimate relationships, our parenting relationships as well. So in TBRI, we really focus on understanding our own attachment styles, what that might look like, how that might show up in our daily life, and how that might show up in our parenting with our children as well. So we go into that quite a lot in TBRI. I'm just going to very quickly talk about giving yeses and giving voice. So if you come back to that attachment cycle and the baby expresses needs and needs aren't met, what we try and do is deliberately set up situations where we can, and this is one of my favorite TBRI strategies, is setting up a situation where we can deliberately get the child to ask for their needs so that we can say yes. And I call this money in the bank. So I'm going to share with you 2 ways that I do this in my home. I use food, because often food is an issue for our children from hard places through an inherent scarcity drive. So kids who come into my home, we've got 2 boxes, one in our pantry, one in our fridge, and it's called I'm Hungry box, because I know our kids from hard places are always hungry. And I say to them, you can have anything from these 2 boxes any time of the day. I will never say no. And this is the number 1 tip for if you're going to implement something like this. You can never say no. If you say no, you're basically leaving that baby cry in the cot, right? Where this is an example of how we bring the baby, our bigger kids, back to those earlier attachment needs. So using something like that is, something like food is a really good way, because it's bringing back that nurturing. So I want the child to practice using their good words every time. So I get to monitor how many times they're hitting up the hungry box. But secondly, they're practicing, right? Because a lot of our children from hard places don't have good manners, right? So we're going to practice that. But most importantly, it's so I can say yes. Every single time. And the amount of yeses that I can say, what I'm doing is I'm building trust for that child. Now, the other way that I use this is in my house, you can have water or water if you're thirsty, but I have super dupers by the box full. So if you want a super duper any time of the day, yes, absolutely you can, if you use your good words. Do kids who are new to my home have 10, 12, whatever, super dupers in my home? Yes, they do. But that's 10 or 12 yeses that I've been able to give to that child, and I have got immediate money in the bank. So when I actually need to say a no to that child, because I've got a big bank of yeses, I'm much more likely to get an acceptance of the no, because our children from hard places really struggle with that notion, don't they, of no. Over time, though, what I find, because they're testing me, right? They're like, sure, lady, as if you're going to give me a super duper as soon as I wake up. Yes, I am. But so they will test me, and they will have multiple, but over time that reduces. And in fact, kids that are here long term, they don't even bother. But there are 2 ways that I give yeses in my home. I'll give you and look, you can take this is honestly my favorite, and I'll share with you another very quickly, a more recent yes that I discovered. And this is just about being curious, right? I have a little girl who comes to me for respite, and she's incredibly challenging, delightful, but incredibly challenging. She's got the FASD, she's got the ADHD, she's got the ASD, she's got the ODD. She's 6. Developmentally, she's about 18 months. Now, I like having nice scented candles in my home, which she loves to blow out, which really annoys me. That's a trigger for me, right? So I put them up and I hide them because she wants me to light them, and then so she can blow them out. One day in preparation for her coming one weekend, I realized, hang on a minute, this is a yes opportunity. So I bought out 25 candles, I'd say, and lit them all. And when she got to my home, we ran through the house. I explained to her, I've lit all my candles for you. And I said to her, what I want you to do is ask me with your good words. We're practicing your good words, remember. Ask me with your good words, and I'll say yes every single time. So we ran through the house holding hands, laughing hysterically, dysregulating her nervous system, right? So getting her escalated, pausing. She'd look at me with those beautiful eyes and say, can I blow it out, please? Yes. So I got 25 yeses out of this kiddo. The minute she walked into my home, we had the best weekend ever. Not a meltdown. She was the most compliant child I've ever had her at, and I don't have nearly the same problems that her poor carer has. But that's an example of the power of a yes. So 25 yeses in the bank straight away, that set her up for success over the weekend and really strengthened that trust. Now her background and history is strong of neglect. So lots of no's for her. So she really doesn't tolerate no. And we've been practicing over the last couple of years on how to tolerate no. So it's another way that we do in TBRI. We play games to help children tolerate that awful word no. All right, our engagement strategies. These are the things that I like to pull out on the days that it's hard for me, where I may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and it's a bit of a check for me. So healthy touch. when I'm cross or frustrated or upset with with the world or in general or whatever, I notice that I tend to withdraw and may not give as many healthy touches. So touch is a biological imperative, and our children from hard places, if they don't get that, they will find other ways to get that need met. So that might be through aggression, violence, sexualized behaviors, but it's a biological imperative. So on the days where connection might be hard for me, I make sure I give extra touches, cuddles, high fives. If I'm giving an instruction, I'll hold their hands and give their hands a squeezy hug. Valuing eye contact. Now, there's some cultural elements to this. So obviously, we're not going to force eye contact for some children who may have be on the autism spectrum, for example, or who may be First Nations children. It may not be culturally appropriate. But as much as possible, I'm going to be giving good eyes, where my eyes are communicating non-verbally. You're the best kid I've seen all day. Knowing that often the way that, and if you think about your child who's your trickiest, what do you think the non-verbal signals that they're getting from adults and people around them in their world? Are they getting positive eye contact of, when you look at a baby, babies are designed for us to look at them and melt. We want to emulate that sort of same through our eye contact. And often, because of our children from hard places and their big behaviors, they're getting really angry eye contact. And so they avoid eye contact a lot. So I try and use eye contact a lot, to make sure that they're listening, but also so I can communicate through my eyes. You're amazing. You're the most precious thing I've seen today. And just these are our non-verbals that communicate that attachment, connection to our children. Our voice quality, so this is making sure that we're playful and in our pitch and cadence when we're talking in general, but also when I'm correcting a behavior, I'm mindful that my cadence and my pitch might be lower to mean that I mean business. Behavior matching. So this can be as simple as wearing the same color as a child, or moving to doing something that I know that they like, or sharing a similar breakfast. So if the relationship's a little bit weak, or we've had a bit of a rupture and they're angry at me or whatever, a child's angry at me, I might be really more attuned, and I know that they might like a hot chocolate for breakfast. So I say, hey, let's make one together. I'll have one as well. And so matching, because what we're signaling in doing that is belonging. You belong to me, you belong with me. And so that's sort of, again, a non-verbal strategy. We use a lot of playful interaction in TBRI. It's woven through everything that we do. If I can teach a child a new skill through play, I'm doing it. If I can teach them how to accept no, if I can teach them how to clean their room, if I can teach them how to brush their teeth, I'm doing it through play. So there's lots of games and things that we do through playful interaction. And this is about us just being, not being afraid to be silly, because often we feel like, it's difficult for us to be silly. Or if you're like me as an adult, sometimes we forget to play, and we're all process driven, right? I've got to do this, and out the door, right? But sometimes just slowing down and having a little bit of a play helps me get through the day with my kids from hard places. Now, I'm going to quickly just tell you about the empowering principles. As I said, these are our physiological. These are nice and simple. Water, making sure our kids are hydrated. That research around the body tells us that children who've had high adversity, especially in early childhood, get dehydrated quicker. Often is the underlying need. They need a drink of water. I don't know about you guys, but often when kids come to me, they're drinking Coke, Slurpees, they're not drinking water, right? So we prioritize drinking water. That's all you get in my house, right? That's all you get. Everyone has a water bottle. I model it. I get them to drink frequently. I teach them around how to monitor their urine color. If it's really dark, that means you're dehydrated. This is what's happening in your body. Like, I give them the language and empower them to take responsibility for their body and what's happening in their brain. Likewise with blood sugar and glucose. So the study also found that that blood sugar drops quicker for children who've experienced adversity. For those who, and I think everyone's experienced being hangry, how unreasonable you are when you're hangry. Sometimes it's about the blood sugar has dropped. And if you think about a escalation for your children, when they've really expended a lot of energy, it takes a lot of energy to have a tantrum, right? We need to refuel their body. We need to give them more hydration so we don't end up in the secondary spirals and big behaviors. Sleep as well. I've got some great tips for sleep. Introducing things like rituals, and can't go into it today, but a great strategy is if you've got, and I was working with this grandma recently, and we've done everything right over the last 9 months, and we got her little guy out of residential care. He's got all the D's, and we just couldn't. Mornings is really rough for him, right? And so I said to her, he's got a good structure, and he's in bed early, and it looks like he's getting 12 hours sleep, but he's bad grouchy as in the morning. So we made him some little protein balls to shove in his mouth as soon as he gets up, because he does get hangry a lot. I got Nan to buy an old Apple Watch on Marketplace for $50. We discovered that kiddo, his deep and REM sleep was less than an hour in the 12 hours that he's in bed. So he wasn't actually having a restorative sleep. So we've sort of, by process of elimination, realize that he's actually not rested. His blood sugar is dropping, so he's more hangry in the morning. So we just made a few tweaks and adjustments, and now and we increase the connection and play in the morning with Nan. And all of a sudden we've got this beautifully regulated kiddo in the mornings. We talk a lot about meeting the sensory needs. So we go into a deeper dive in the full training around how do we meet those sensory needs? How do we look for what could be sensory, and not just our 5 senses. We look at those internal senses, the vestibular system, the interoception. Does our child recognize when they're hungry or thirsty? Often our children from hard places find that really difficult. So if they don't recognize when they're hungry, and then they become hangry, that can be the underlying need for the big behaviors. Again, thinking about what you're like when you're hangry. We also look at the ecological strategies. So this is things like looking at the physical environment, the emotional climate. We do a lot of deliberate teaching through play of self-regulation. We develop lots of rituals with children, particularly around times that might be tricky for kids. So bedtimes, going to school, like early mornings, like developing rituals around those really hard times that are rich in connection, that help bring that felt safety for our kiddos. We focus a lot on transitions. I know, preparing children for what's ahead. For our kids from hard places, we need to double it up and give them much more warning about changes. That's often something that kind of really flips their lids. And we use lots of scaffolding. I like to look at some behaviours as a skill deficit. So, anything from sharing a pizza to having a play date, sometimes it's a skill deficit. So we do lots of role playing and puppet play, and don't worry, that works really well on older kids as well. Being silly and where I'm them and they're me, and that, they've got to try and wrangle me. You can have a real laugh at that. All of these things, what we're doing is building through positive experiences ways to do things differently and building their social emotional capacity. And finally, I'm going to quickly just run through. Now, I've just seen the time. I've hit over 5 minutes there. Deb,
yes,
because we started late, can I ask for a slight extension?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. If anyone has to leave, they can leave. Otherwise, we're all here.
Yeah, and I saw a couple of people had to scoot off for appointments and whatever, but if you guys are happy, I want to just share with you these last couple of slides, and also I want to share with you, if you stick around, I'll show you Dr. Purvis in action, and show you some of the well, she actually uses a lot of the TBRI strategies in this particular scenario. A trigger alert though, there is a kiddo screams at the beginning, so I'll just warn you. But let's quickly look at the correcting principles, and again, I'm just going to very quickly touch on these, but bringing you back to the 5 Bs, whilst the behavior is what we're trying to address, and we do address every single behavior. I'd rather address a rolled eye or a minor disrespect than have a hole in my wall. We're really focusing on those underlying Bs as well. so being mindful of that. I'm also very mindful of that mindset shift for me in terms of how I'm viewing that behavior. So am I viewing the behavior through a lens of willful disobedience? Is this child getting out of bed to deliberately ruin my day? Yes, sometimes it feels like it. But if I can train my brain and shift to my kiddo just needs something and they're in survival and I need to help them move out of that, I'm going to get a much better response. So in our correcting principles, we've got 3 goals. And the first one is that we want to remain connected. And in fact, after we've corrected our child, we actually want our connection strengthened, which is very different to traditional models of correcting and disciplining, right? Often all we want is just the change behavior. But in TBRI, we sort of layer on that. And if we're using the principles, all the 3 principles together, we can get this, and this kind of helps us stay on track. I want to make sure also not only that I'm stronger in my connection with my kiddo, I want that behavior changed, but I also want them and me to be content in how we got there and the outcome. So I talk always often about the TBRI train. There's an end goal, how I get there. And this is what happens in the correcting principles. I want to make sure that my connection remains. But at the end of the day, I want my kiddo in doing the thing that I want them to do, right? But I also want to honor their needs. I want them to feel heard in the process. And I want them to learn through the experience of a correction as well. So it's not just a compliance base, do this because I said, because I'm the adult. I'm not going to get anywhere if I have that, if I come at it like that. So again, we break it down into 2. So we've got our proactive. So again, we're teaching positive social skills when the child is calm and alert. That way they can access that information much quicker. I'm building lots of beautiful muscle memory for them in their bodies and their brains. I share a lot of power with my kids, particularly when I've got a kiddo that might be controlling. So for those who have controlling children, choice the hell out of them. And I choice them in ways that, and look, choice sounds easy, but choice is a lot more tricky when we're using it with its proper intent. The issue, the rules of choice is I am still in charge. So I'm not going to give you a choice that I'm not comfortable with. So I'm still the adult in charge. Yes, I'm sharing my power. I have to also give you 2 choices that are equally palatable to you, right? So eat your dinner or go to bed. Is that a choice? Could be a choice, but it's a threat, right? For my kid from a hard place, they're going to go, bring it on, lady. Because they will be activated by that threat. So my alternative choice might be you can finish. Well, actually, I'm not big on forcing kids to eat their dinner. They eat until they're full. So that wouldn't be an issue in my home. But what would be a bath, right? A choice in my house. This is a bit of a sneaky one. Choice in my house, because bath time can be a challenge. You've got 2 choices. You can have a swim in the pool, or you can have a bath. Either way, you're getting wet. Either way, you're getting clean, right? What do you think kids choose? Not every day of the week, if they don't know me. They choose a pool, right? They have a swim. They're like, for reals? I can have a swim? Yes, my pool is freezing. So they come into me, can I have a warm bath, right? I have a double clean kid. If I didn't have a pool, I would offer to throw water bombs at them. I don't care how you get clean, you're getting clean. That's the choice, right? So that's what I mean about the intention must be 2 equally palatable choices, right? Not you can have a bath or go to bed. They're not a choice. That's a threat. So when we give choice, we're giving agency to that strong sense of agency for our children. The youngest kiddo I've TBRI'd is 3. That's because that's a lower age that's our lowest age. It works beautifully. And this was a child who was incredibly controlling. He could receive no care. So I just choiced him for 2 days. Do you want this plate or this plate? This spoon or this spoon? This cup or this cup? Every single cup or spoon or whatever I offered him was basically the same, but he had choice and agency. I was his 7th placement in 9 days. So that kiddo didn't know whether he was up or down. So giving him that sense of choice and control lowered his power, his need for control over everybody in this household. And over time, he was able to sort of accept a lot more nurturing and care and redirection. But I had to understand and appreciate where he had come from. We also look at we have life value terms. So these are language scripts that we practice. They're 2 or 3 words. So things like with respect, right? So I'm prone to lecturing when I'm, when a child's not doing what they should be doing. So these are really helpful for me, because when I lecture, kids kind of tune out. So I can just do a quick redirection with respect, or use your words. That's all I'm saying. We practice these at low arousal levels so kids know what they mean. So in the heat of the moment, when things might be a little bit elevated, I just need to say those words and the child knows exactly what I'm talking about. So it's an example of how we do teach this proactively to be able to use it down the track. And behavioural scripts are ways for children to practice how to do things the right way. So we might do this through redos. We offer compromises, and again, this comes into that sharing power realm. Again, I'm happy to give compromises. It teaches children the value of negotiation and the power of their words as well. In our responsive strategies, we have two main ways. The ideal response is a framework that is given on how we respond when situations are happening. And then we have levels of response. So depending on the type of behavior, how intense the behavior is, depends on the level at which we're going to enter in to respond to that behavior. So for example, if I'm getting just low arousal, sort of a little bit of sass or disrespect, I will respond to that behavior at a level 1, right? It's just usually just a verbal redirection that's done playfully. And if my connection's strong enough, that's all I need. Then we level up again, depending on how the behavior escalates. If that doesn't work, I'll just keep on going. If I have a big escalation, I may need to come in at a level 3 type of response. What we often find for our children from hard places is that because of their propensity for big behaviors, what happens is that they get over responded to. So they get over corrected, and the efficiency in which their behaviors are corrected is often loses power. So we tend to, because we're worried about what they can do, we tend to meet so the behavior might be at a level 2, but we might come in at a level 3 or 4 to respond to the behavior. So really the levels of response and the ideal response helps us to recognize what level we are correcting the behavior, absolutely, but at what level do we need to correct it that's efficient, that meets the actual the intensity of the behavior, I suppose, for want of a better words. So we go into how we do that, and what are the cues that we're looking for in the child, what cues are they giving us physiologically in their body, how they're presenting, which will help us work out which level of response do we come in, and what sort of things do we need to bring in for the child. So a very quick overview. I could have gone on forever. But any questions or anything that anyone wants to clarify before I show you this quick video? And I think it's only a couple of minutes of Dr. Purvis. Anyone have any questions, comments? Oh, been great.
Can I ask, if you've got pre-existing children in the family and a kid from hard places comes in and needs this extra approach, which sounds brilliant, how does that, how do you manage that with your own kids are used to other?
Yeah, great question, Lynn. First of all, I practiced TBRI on my own kids, and this was part of my mindful journey, I suppose. And I always say, when we know better, we do better. And I thought, my oldest kiddo's 25, and I thought, and I've still got some at home, but I was like, oh man, I wish I knew this stuff before. So I really adjusted my parenting style all round, really. And so my kids got to see a calmer mum. they were a little bit scared and worried at first. They're like, what's happening? Is this a trick? But they got to see me adjust my parenting style. And because my kids are teenagers, I was able to sort of explain to them, these are the reasons. This is what I've learned. This is, on reflection, I know that I did these things not in a great way, and I'm learning. For kids from hard places who require that additional, pass, I try and particularly because they're teenagers, I try and use those opportunities to have conversations and help them understand that need beneath the behavior. And I'll give you an example. Our 11-year-old the other night was saying something at dinner that my 19-year-old son reacted to and said, oh, you're just so attention seeking. And I corrected him at the table because it was rude, but secondly, not in a way that was shaming to anybody, but said, I turned to her and I said, I wonder if you asked that question because you're worried about that you've got this commitment and you weren't sure how to frame that question. I wonder if that's why you asked it in that way. And she looks at me and goes, yeah, it kind of was. And because I've been helping my kids understand the needs beneath the behavior and really helping them shift their lens as well. I'm conscious that I've given my kids I've passed out on the gift of the willful disobedience behavior lens that goes to, generationally. And this is the mindful awareness stuff, right? This is about us being open and raw and honest about there's stuff here that I could do better and I want to do better at that influences how I respond to, and interact with this kiddo. So I've been trying to teach my kids on shifting their lens to more of that survival lens and understand the behavior as well. It's going to be dependent on the ages of your, kids, your own biological children, obviously, but I think we can always explain ways and why we're doing things. And I try and explain as much as I can to all kids what I'm doing and why, because if they understand the why, the rupture repair, we have a rule, we're not doing it, we just had a thing, right? When we calm down, we're going to come back and talk about the thing. And we come back and we do a redo, whether it's a verbal one, we practice it, we talk about how we could both have done things differently, we make up, and then it's all, we do we're stronger in our connection. And think about all the things we do with our kids from hard places, how many opportunities for repair, which can also be really hard for our kids from hard places to accept that, right? It can be really threatening. So I find that when I explain why we're doing that, it's less threatening to them in a lot of ways, and they can move and engage in that process as well. Did that answer your question, Lynn? Yeah, great.
There was
there another question?
Yeah, the last one from Jade.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see it, Kerri, or do you want me to read it out?
Jade. Yes, okay. Thanks. How can we find out doing more of this training or a longer version? Talk to Deb. Curious, how do you think there's merit in explaining to older children what some of the early attachment words that they get? Absolutely. I work with sibling groups all the time. And, I even the yes, the super dupers, the I'm hungry boxes, I will explain to children that, the reason that we have this rule in our house is because, and I explain, because I know that when you were younger and because you've had lots of different caregivers who haven't been able to meet your needs and a lot of people have said no to you, I want to be able to say yes to you in lots of ways. And I draw out that circle to kids. I explain it to them. Again, there's so much power in understanding. If we can help our kids understand why they know they're different, right? They know they react different. They know that everything is different about them. So if we can help them understand why they're different and be deliberate in why we're doing certain things to help shift that, we're always going to get that buy-in and meeting. I've never had a kid say no. So absolutely, I share that. And obviously that's when the time is right. I would never just, as a professional, I don't just come in and share, I established that connection and relationship and felt safety first. For a kid in my home, I established that connection, felt safety relationship first. And over time, as we get to know each other and they feel safer and they trust me more, I can explain why I do these things. But absolutely, as much as I can, I'll try and share the why. To demystify, you know, why they're different. And, you know, I also find people find it difficult to name the things that have happened for our children because often they're so awful. We don't need to go into detail, but we can acknowledge it and say, you know, I know that it's been really tough for you. I know that there's been times where you know, for whatever reason, your mum or dad wasn't able to pick you up and look after you when you're a little baby, you know, acknowledging that and validating that and then explaining, but I want to do that in this way. And it's important for you to understand what it's like, that when you have a need, even if it's a super duper, that you can ask me with your good words and I will always say yes.